Yeah, I guess not. I've been meaning to like try a DNA test. There's a lot of them out there. Just out of curiosity. Um, like just knowing where I guess like my ancestors came from. I'm just out of curiosity. Like it wouldn't have a profound impact on my life like now, but I think it's interesting. Because I like history. Um, but that's what I found. I don't know if the website is a trusted source, but apparently like the Galts were like a family of boar hunters. Which I
Wow.
find quite interesting.
Well, a little bit of time traveling here. Let's assume
Mm,
that we're kind of digging into, let's say, 130 years from now. Like, what would
mm,
that level of ancestry, searching for your information, um,
mm.
do you think that there would be something that you can kind of like reflect on? Like, just imagine here, like you're time traveling, kind of like put
Uh,
yourself in 130 years from now, and like, wait, this from Oregon, a musician. Wow, this vast knowledge of music and a teacher. Like, what impression would you have finding that out?
hmm. Like if I'm like a person 130 years now, like looking back on my ancestry and I find out like there's this person in Oregon, like that's what you're asking?
Yes.
Um, I think in a way it's like there's a certain sentimental value, I think, to seeing um what people in your bloodline did like a long time ago. I think there's a sentimental value to that. I'm not entirely like this is almost like a philosophical question. Um, I'm not entirely sure like on the like practical impacts of that. Sentimentally, I think it's really cool. Um, I I don't know. I think a lot of people put a very strong emphasis on um bloodline and like certain things being in your blood. And I can understand that and like the sentiment there, and how like much that means to people in some ways. But I think that um like there's a lot that people would attribute to blood, or would say, oh, you must have like such and such blood in your veins or something because you can do this thing, that I don't think should be attributed to blood, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
um it's almost like when you get into the discussion about and let me know if I'm getting off topic or anything, but these are kind of like my thoughts pertaining to the question. You get into the discussion um of like ethnicity and race, if that's a thing, and like how those intertwine philosophically, and like what these things mean and how they impact someone's experience in life as a whole, and certain propensities. And I know like a ton of people, um, especially my mom is like a primary example, who by blood and like uh, phenotypically, like she looks like me in the sense that she has a similar complexion. Her hair is a similar color. It's like a similar thickness. We look like we're from like America stereotypically, or like somewhere in Europe stereotypically. But like she was born and raised in Bolivia, and like that is such an important part of her ethnicity in a way that you wouldn't ever assume or like just guess just by looking at her. Um, and I don't know. I think that's fascinating, and just the ways that people think about that are interesting to hear and discuss. Like if I was looking back at my ancestry and I saw this person in Oregon. Um, like I guess my first impression would be like, oh, that's kind of strange. Like that's not very common over in Oregon or on the West Coast. Like, but the thing is, like looking at history, those kinds of things, um, like when you see the movement of a genre, like as it crosses like a continent or a country, goes over here, or like a certain people group migrate from here, or there's like mixing between these two people groups. There's always like there's someone who does it first. There's there has to be a start to that like move that ends up being this like big thing that happens, that you see in history. You recognize the big thing that happens, but you never really um, look at like what started it, I guess.
Right, because sometimes we look at what the snowball wound up being about 20 miles away, but we didn't see the
Yeah,
little speck of it that started off.
yeah, exactly. Um, so there's so many hypotheticals, but like 130 years from now, I don't know what would have happened. Like looking back on this situation, like is what I'm doing over here in Oregon as kind of an outlier? Is that going to cause a chain reaction? Like a snowball effect? Is it not? Is it just gonna kind of be lost in the sand, lost in the crowd? I I don't know. So I guess it depends on what happens because of that is how I would view that differently. I hope that answers your question. It was a little more nuanced than you're probably expecting, but
No, in fact, I'm sure there's a lot more to it, which were, kind of like music. You're kind of following the restriction of what you feel because it still needs more exploring. There isn't
mhm,
a final of an answer there because 130 years still hasn't happened. However, thinking of it as if
yeah.
we just time travel and just came back, sometimes we would have to revisit it, almost like a Back to the Future thing. What
Mm,
changed it and my thought process, and what in fact do I see today that tomorrow I might not see, or what did I see yesterday that could affect how I see things today, and vice versa. And yeah, it's a thing of the reason why I like that. I started asking that question because sometimes we think of it past like 5% of what we know. We kind of pass it on to someone else within
mm,
a
yeah.
conversation because we're with ourselves 24 hours a day, but there's only a short period of time that we get to communicate with someone, and
Uh-huh.
maybe that 5% might affect them in a positive way. So
Mm, mhm,
there's a level of understanding when appreciating our ancestors.
mhm,
If five
mhm.
percent of what they did affect who I am today, that allows me to express myself how I do and think how
Yeah.
I do. I've inherited this. This isn't all me, but the rest of it is intentionally me, and that might affect the next person, or the next person might affect how I turn out, even days from
Mhm.
now. So
Yeah.
there's a bit of a responsibility that we kind of communicate with, and I really do feel like when we gravitate towards instruments and express it, which those are two different avenues that we kind of intermingle as we're playing
Mhm.
the past and the present, we kind of do time travel a bit. We kind of
Yeah.
transcend how we want to sound, and we finally get to that sound. It's not a complete out of body experience, but when you think of it in time travel, it's kind of like
Mhm.
we see where we want to be. So that's one of the reasons
Yeah.
why I asked that question, because it seems like the way I see you enjoying playing an instrument,
Uh-huh.
it's not just a thing of just that you're spontaneously inspired to just do that, but it's like you're kind of capturing what you're expressing at the moment,
Uh-huh.
and that takes a lot of just, okay, I'm gonna go for it. I don't want to use the word bravery because I
Mhm.
mean bravery is kind of subjective.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Anyone
Sure.
can define bravery, but it does allow yourself to get outside of any type of comfort that can come about. And it's a little daring because we don't know how it's going to happen. Like
Uh-huh.
how I
Uh-huh.
spontaneously dropped my bottle and my mouse on the side as we were talking.
Uh,
Oh, better said, as I was listening to your explanation from your background, which is really cool,
yeah,
by the way. Illegales, which
illegales.
I know I'm kind of cutting off the bit of the future time travel, but now to travel to the past. There's
Uh-huh,
something about Illegales that kind of allowed people to just be like, okay, I like this right now. I'm enjoying
uh-huh,
this right now. But then after it was over, it's like you kind of do think a little bit different because I know that's not just that genre. Illegales had so much flavor intermingled,
uh-huh.
so much groove in there. And turns out that they had a lot of people in the background who influenced them with that sound.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I really like how you're connecting that to just a time travel when you're talking about like heritage and looking back in the past. The one thing that I keep coming up against over and over and over again that I think is really really cool, and I want to like adopt in some sort of way, is the um just learning about like oral history, um and like seeing this like a tambora rhythm and realizing like wow, this rhythm has been passed down from generation to generation to generation, and like each generation, like there's a little new nuance or a little twist that they put on it that like creates this new thing, and then people take that idea and then they change it a little bit. And like all these rhythms and all this music and stuff, like this is something that I one of my goals or things that I want to do is like I want to pass this on to like my children, and then I want them to pass that on to their children and so on, and like whoever they meet, because it's such a cool thing. And like I don't know, 130 years from now, like maybe one of the variations that like I created for like a tambora derecha or something is like someone pulls that out of their bag, like hey, there's this cool variation that this one guy in Oregon played this one time and I like it and I'm going to use it for this thing. And the way that that connects like the present to the past and the past to the future even, um I think is really really fascinating, and it's a very um makes you feel like you're a part of something, in like you're like it's a big family for lack of a better word. um just
Amen.
how it, just everything being so connected and everything influencing everything else, and the complex history and behind all of that, and how I mean there's so many examples of how we can look back on these just tragic and awful things that happened in history, but we can see and appreciate like the good that came out of them, and then that has its own place in the history, and how we deal with that, and how some things, some rhythms even might be like might have come out of that and are referencing that in hold sentimental value, um, because of that. It's just it. I don't know. It's and it's something that seems to be unique to not just music but art as a whole. Like in dance and music are the ones I know more about. I'm sure there's other forms of art that are, I mean, food, I guess. Food is a big one. Um, Clothing. I just don't know much about that. Like music and dance. Um, there's always stories to tell with them, and I think each rhythm tells a story. Each dance tells a story, and um, like as a story is passed down from generation to generation, like extra details are added or a little twist is put on here, maybe there's a plot twist in this version, um and I can't describe the feeling. It's like it's tapping into something that is so much bigger than myself, um history wise. I think it's really special, um metaphysical even.
Definitely. In fact, I just hope that that when they search back to our time, that they don't. they don't forget the that connecting dot, that connecting factor, that wonderful human being that connected you and I way before today's interaction. Which
Mm.
I looked into one of your videos that I kept going back to. I'm like, there's something you did there, which is fascinating that you were mentioning about merengue derecho, how maybe it came up with a variation that they want to use. That
Mm.
redoble that you did in that video with Ray Chino Diaz in Florida, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
that
Uh-huh.
redoble, that's not a standard redoble that's used either for merengue or típico.
Uh-huh.
That's a redoble that you find in a marching band,
Hmm.
but not just any
I've got a
marching
lot of
band.
influence from that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I picked up on that. Like, wait a second. I'm wondering if he's been part of a marching band for much longer than 3 or 4 years. He must have a longer background than that and have some history with even with the marimba. Because
Mm-hmm.
where you were placing it has to do with notation, not just a hit or a strike of
Hmm.
either side, which was really cool because even though Rechino was, holding the beat on the guira, that's a connecting factor. I met Rechino Diaz in 2007. He reached
Mm.
out to me how I reached out to you through the internet. At that time, they
Mm.
used to allow messaging through YouTube. I had a
Mm.
video that I put up, which after about a year, I actually took it down, of playing just a standard drum kit, hi hat, piccolo snare, and a small 16-inch bass drum. And he was so
Mm.
intrigued by that video that was only about 2.5 minutes that he invited
Mm.
me to his studio and gave me a lot of advice.
He and I have been talking for a long time. Um, he reached out to me when I first posted like a video, pretty low quality video, but I was playing like tambora and guira with the basketball band at my high school because it was really fun and I wanted to try it out. And like he somehow found out about that, and the guys from the band Afro Dominicano found out about that. They like started telling other people, and then I've been talking with Regino like ever since then, just about like I have all these questions about like history and like how do I do this and how do I do this better, and what's like advice you have for this thing, or like how do I play the interboro like better on guira. um, which has come a long way. But um, that's one thing he was mentioning. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's him saying it, so it's probably pretty accurate. He was telling me just about how like a lot of the younger guys, or like the people, and especially the típico scene right now, or this was like 2 years ago or something, he was telling me, like they're hesitant to like to innovate, to try new things, is what he was saying, because he has had so much influence on especially merengue típico. Like he introduced the timbales and the um and the bombo for the guira and the caja, the snare, um like into típico, and now it's just like a normal thing that like every típico group does. um but then like the innovation stopped. It didn't hasn't there's not been much new development aside from like some really cool cortes. Um, this is what he was saying, and he thinks that um, like just through us talking, him and I, like that we can experiment, like try a bunch of new things, and hopefully some of the things that we try will stick, and someone will like take that and like say, oh, this is cool, and then it'll be like in a way ingrained into the broader repertoire, like not just from his and my music, but someone will take like the music that we've created and replicate it because they like it, and now it's like an established kind of like I like linguistics a lot, so I'm thinking about this now. um like how pidgin languages and Creole languages
Hmm.
happen. It's like a pidgin language happens um when like the example I'm thinking of right now is um like I don't know, Haiti, um where like there's two different languages, or way more than two, but there's like the dominant language, which was French at the time, um, and all these other languages from the different places where the slaves were imported from, with their own languages, and something had to happen so that they could communicate. So this like pidgin language was formed that was like a combination of the two, whereas like we can all communicate and kind of understand what these other people are saying. So that's like a pidgin language, the things like being innovated to mix in a way. At that point, it's a pidgin language. But as soon as someone new is born into that pidgin language, and then they start speaking that pidgin language as their native tongue, then it becomes a Creole language. So and then it's like established, it's rooted, and then its history starts to flourish, and it develops more, and now it's its own thing. And I think in the same way, like using the redobles that you're talking about, like if that's just a thing that happens for sake of happening, like maybe it's a mix of influencers or something, and it kind of finds its way into it, and it's like, oh, this is cool. But then maybe someone grows up into like the whole typical like culture and stuff, and they hear that, and to them that's part of it, and then they incorporate it because to them that's standard, even if it's like was innovated at a different time than like the older innovations that built the foundations of the tradition. But then to them it's like, now this is a part of typical. It's like it is typical. It has become a standard to them, which I think is really really fascinating.
Well, yeah. I think Chino was definitely on point with that because I'd say around 2002 was when it started pretty much plateauing, where that was a standard to sound like that, to
Mm.
sound as they sound today. Honestly, merengue is just starting to catch its footing, to sound a little different.
Mm-hmm.
But for the past decade, it's been sounding like if we're still back in 2001. It
Mm-hmm.
really hasn't evolved too much. However, some people just expressing themselves online, just like as you were explaining, Master Chris and Enrique Guida has had
Mm-hmm.
a massive influence on that, on percussionists just getting out of themselves, being comfortable. But sometimes it's just and it's like, fine, we can make 10,000 arrangements off of this and just a few cuts and
Uh-huh.
done. No variations, no solos, no repiques, nothing nothing.
Mm.
But what they've done is incorporated the sound of the guira, even falling out of the rhythm as being
Mm.
part of
Yeah.
making the song. Just let the rest of the melody just breathe a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like what they used to do in jazz. They would
Mm.
just use the hi hat and everything else would just fall out. And that was the whole song. And after feeling what the rest of the band was expressing, then people have a different appreciation for the sound. You
Hmm.
know, and it's all expression. And yes, you're on point with that because when it comes to linguistics and expressing music, it's a language. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
wow, rumba. What's another one? Uh, rumba, guaguancó.
Hmm.
Individual beats that come together to communicate, nothing more, nothing less. You know,
Hmm.
everyone does their part, and we communicate just fine.
Hmm.
And it just needs sometimes just that one little touch to variate, to keep it evolving. But
Hmm.
yeah, Ray was right with that. In fact, there's times that I've listened to Deepico, and it almost feels like if I'm kind of still in 2002 listening to it.
Hmm.
But there
Hmm.
are a few people who do express themselves a little bit different. I've always liked what Bolivia was doing
Hmm.
because he started bringing this. Well, to be more exact, he did an arrangement with fusing Deepico and jazz, which wasn't heard
Hmm.
before in Deepico.
Yeah.
Some tried it and really wasn't very closely accepted, but I believe the one he did was close to 12 minutes long, and he did a rendition of
Was Autumn Leaves?
Autumn Leaves. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that recording. I listen to it a lot.
There's just something about Autumn Leaves that just resonates, and it sounds beautiful in just about any genre. I haven't heard it in
Uh-huh.
bachata, but
Oh,
I once listened to Autumn Leaves in cumbia. Like Autumn Leaves is
really?
yeah, it's an amazing piece. It can be expressed in any rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that's interesting.
the notations are perfectly placed where it can fall into 4/4,
Hmm.
and it doesn't fall out of place. One genre I don't think it would do very well in would be festejo, because the clave for
Festejo.
festejo, it has such a unique clave. I was just talking today with my wife about that. A lot of these rhythms you can pretty back put it into 3/3 or 3/2, but it varies. I think it's 1 2 3 da 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 da, and it can keep varying. You can replace a three with a one or a three with a two, and it still sounds good. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, I like how you're bouncing back into this with the train traveling because no, I don't like mentioning that too much because I don't want to seem like I'm a little out there because talking about train
Uh-huh.
traveling without a machine is
Yeah,
like, all
yeah.
right, where's the
Oh
tin
man.
foil?
Man, now I can't stop thinking now about uh trying to make autumn leaves into a festejo. I was actually ironically, I was messing around with like some festejo patterns and landau patterns, like on a cajon I have right here by me, like a couple of minutes before we started the call. It's kind of funny that you bring that up, but that'd be an interesting challenge to try and make autumn leaves fit in the festejo. But I would that is a challenge I'm willing to take on.
Excellent. You're definitely qualified.
I'm really curious now. I'm gonna write this down so I don't forget because this is Um, let's see. Let's see. Autumn leaves festejo. All right, it's gonna happen.
Beautiful. Just goes to show sometimes all it takes is a little grain of salt to change things.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow. My cajon is right there. It's a little baby one.
Oh, nice. I got this one recently, which I like because it's got pickups on the inside.
Cool.
So I just plug it directly into my interface and can record right into Ableton and do a bunch of EQing and stuff, and it sounds pretty good.
Holy wow. That's freaking cool.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's not a Peruvian cajon, so it like has I think it has guitar strings in it, so it's like a flamenco cajon.
mm,
But I can EQ all of that out to make it sound like a Peruvian cajon.
wow.
Just cheat a little bit.
I was curious to ask on that too. You have a heck of an ear when it comes to recording because the quality of recordings that you do, it doesn't sound like just okay. I connect this and it's not too loud. It sounds good, but it seems like you really do take your time with EQing your stuff.
Yeah, I'm as far as like production goes, um I'm self-taught and I make a lot of mistakes all the time that I look back on and regret like, oh, I did that wrong, or I could have done that differently, or like, oh, this needed a compressor here. Um, so it's just a lot of trial and error. I have folders and folders and folders of failed projects that sound really bad. But through all those like trials and errors, I found what works, what sounds good to me, and what other people seem to think sounds good.
Mm.
Um, like a relevant one, because I just this like past month, I finally took initiative and put some of my music out on streaming services, which has been a long time coming. But my cover of Bambiche de Novia, I listened to it on a bunch of different speakers now, and it's like, oh, well, on these speakers, there's way too much bass. It's like really overpowering, but over here it sounds fine. But over here it doesn't. I don't know. I'm mixing is a thing I am trying to learn still, and it is a very much a work in progress. But I try my best. I know what I want it to sound like, and I try to get it to sound like that, if that makes sense.
Well, definitely. In fact, the mistakes are where you really learn the most. If it sounds
Yeah,
perfect all the time, then it starts getting to the point where you almost lose the enjoyment of learning.
yeah.
There's tools left and right that we can constantly learn to incorporate. Maybe I should have used less of this, and it gets to the
Mhm,
point that you start realizing that less is a lot more with the balance.
mhm. The thing that I always tell like other musicians, and I have to remind myself all the time, is like in developing skill sets as a musician, like I think that the most important thing to ever develop or to maintain is your ear, in the sense that if my if my ear is always ahead of my technical ability, then there's always something that I can work on and pinpoint that I can work on. So if I keep improving this at like the same rate that I'm improving my hands on whatever instrument, then there's always new things to to learn. There's always things I hear in my ear that I can't play yet, and then I learn how to play those things. And then there's something more in my ear. Then I learn how to play that thing, and it just keeps going. I think it's super important to have your ear being improved, um, uh, at least a a good distance away from everything else, just so you can always see what the next step is, if that makes sense.
Wow, yeah, that comes back to like the assembly line analogy. As
Hmm.
long as things are spaced out at the right moment, there won't be a mishap. Everything works smoothly. So yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
being almost like saying, I guess another way of understanding as I was listening to you, that's you pretty much described being in the pocket.
Hmm.
When you're in the pocket, you're allowed new things to be introduced, and it's not going to fall out of pocket.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Wow. So it's like I guess you have a hard time not flexing your improvisational background, which I use to not flex, but more of a expressing your improvisational background. Like it gets to the point that it's like it's hard not to want to introduce a new thing, but it has to be tasteful.
Hmm. Hmm.
Wow.
It has to make sense, or it makes sense enough to where the things that don't make sense are acceptable in some sort of way.
Wow. So, wow, that just introduced a new question. I take it you might enjoy some Thelonious Monk.
Uh, Strangely enough, I don't actually listen to a lot of jazz. I have like a few guys I'll listen to, um, a few bands I really enjoy, but for the most part, I don't listen to a lot of jazz, strangely enough, even though I'm a jazz major. I'm a jazz student.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure I have like some Monk tunes in some of my playlists, but I wouldn't go and tell someone like, "Oh, I listen to Monk a lot." Um, but it sounds like I would enjoy listening to him, is what you're saying?
Definite, because what you express is pretty much like how he sounds when he plays.
Hmm.
He introduces something new, not too out of place, but theoretically it's kind of out of place, but
Uh-huh.
it's not so out of place that it's pleasing to the ear.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Kind of like the going out of time with the Guida thing. Yeah.
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 There's at this point I only have two more questions to ask him. If a new question, gets introduced, I might throw it in there. But if there was one instrument that you would choose to sit in a crowd, I'd say maybe 15, 20 people, no door, no vocals, no other musicians around. What's that one instrument that you feel that you can entertain those people for 45 minutes expressing that instrument?
Hmm. Piano.
Wow.
Probably the piano. Yeah. It was my first instrument. I feel uh expressive in the sense of I can I would be able to like um bring across and like present a whole emotional spectrum pretty effortlessly just on the piano, just like improvising and kind of doing things. Whereas like if I had like a Guida, for example, it'd be difficult, although not impossible, to like, okay, this this caballito sounds like really depressed, and this caballito sounds like, oh, it's a little more joyful, and there's like a twinge of remorse or maybe nostalgia in this caballito. I I don't know, but at least for now, my answer will be piano.
Well, yeah, because once it gets to pretty much the 45 minutes, since you can't be vocal, no singing, no talking, just expressing, yeah, that's a great answer. Mambo Podcast. Si te gusta la vaina, suscríbete a la vaina, dale like a la vaina y comparte la vaina. Mambo.